Over the next hour, we're going to have what will hopefully be a very interesting insight, not into dry technical law and finance, but real opinion setting, thought leadership from some key people within the game on a global stage. I'm going to be moderating it. There's going to be about an hour that we have here allocated. We hope, although there's going to be a lot of material, that when we get to 45, 50 minutes, there'll then be a chance for open questions. Everybody in the panel are absolutely delighted to be able to answer any questions you might have. So I'm just going to take a chair, and I'd like to introduce everybody one by one. I'm delighted that our first guest on the panel is a gentleman who flew in overnight from Chicago. Matt Holsizer oversees a business called Peak Six Investments out of Chicago. He has a tremendous track record in investment and indeed has a very keen appreciation not just of the US sports market through his interest in the NHL, but also through European football, colleagues, friends, associates, and his own business interests. So Matt Holsizer will join us on the stage now. Our second guest that we will have with us this morning is a lady who has a background in law. She was on the board of Standard Liège as on the international development side, but is now well known for her position as CEO of Charlton Athletic. Catherine Mehra has been in the English game since the beginning of this year and has again got some very interesting views on the way European football. I'd like to welcome Catherine to the stage. Daniel Cravo has had a very busy summer. As a lawyer to the Uruguayan FA, a number of you will be aware, I think everybody will be aware of Luis Suarez and the incidents that took place in the summer. Daniel was right front and center dealing with the repercussions of that. But not only has he taken international stage on that footing, Daniel has a tremendous track record working with Fluminense, working with Internazionale in South America on their transfers and dealing with legal issues, and joins us having been at the Court of Arbitration for Sport annual seminar in the last few years. Daniel. And last but not least, we are joined by Sean Harvey. Sean is in the position of having to run and organize the Football League, the organization in England that sits just below the Premier League, 72 member clubs. And he comes with a background of having run Leeds United, a tremendous historic club, very appropriate given that we're here at Soccerex with Duncan Reevy and the Reevy family, their connections with Leeds. Sean, again, will be able to give us tremendous insight in the issues of running a national competition. Sean Harvey. As I say, what we're going to do, we're going to chat through a number of issues over the next 45 minutes, 50 minutes, and then please do feel free to ask questions. Daniel, if we start with you, certainly a busy summer. I mean, the only time we'll probably touch on law, the place of law within sport, and I'm sure everybody's going to be fascinated for a couple of minutes in hearing more about what you had to deal with Uruguayan FA and the issues that arose this summer.
Concerning Suarez case, you mean?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, it was an interesting case. Indeed, we took the case in when the case went to the appeal before the CAS, and in this proceeding, there was two offices working, one Spanish office representing Suarez in Barcelona, and we were representing the National Federation of Uruguay. The impact of these 9 matches suspension of the players huge for the National Federation because it represents now that we have the confirmation of the decision of the CAS, despite the fact that we don't have the grounds yet to check what was assessed by the panel. But it is a huge impact, not counting on Suarez for the Federation until probably March of 2016. So it was a very important case, but at least part of the decision issued by the Disciplinary Committee of FIFA that was confirmed by the Appeal Committee of FIFA was set aside, and he was able to come back training and participating in friendly matches. But for the Uruguayan Federation, for my client, and I felt kind of frustrated because I know it was, nobody can defend in totally the behavior of Suarez, that's for sure, we know that. But I think that some some conditions were simply dismissed by the panel, such as considering recidivism by taking the sanctions that he suffered in domestic competition. So I think that there will be some issues to be carefully scrutinized after we have the grounds of the decision, which might happen until the end of this month. So,
Katrin, for you, you've come to this from a legal background. You've been immersed in the world of football for a year or so now.
More or less.
For you, your background as a lawyer, how much is that helping you, and the impact on that in terms of regulation and governance for you now with an owner that has 5 clubs and Standard Liège and Charlton Athletic?
One of the reasons that I wanted to be involved in sport is because as a lawyer I could see we have the rules, and for some kind of reason there is always an exception when it comes to sport. And as a lawyer it frustrated me a lot. And now working for a club for almost a year, I can see why sometimes there need to be exceptions from the law, basically. And that's, I mean, for me, a big lesson, and it's one of the reasons why I think some things should be allowed and some things shouldn't. So being in practice and as a lawyer and now in private working for a club, I can see sometimes where the two clash.
And that's what I'm hoping will come out. We'll see over the next, say, 3/4 of an hour, is that where really sport is allowed to get on and do things. I mean, Sean, for you, running the Football League, 72 member clubs, my own team now in the Championship, Bournemouth. Now we have Bournemouth chairman here. How hard is it? I mean, we've got 2 lawyers here, or 3 lawyers. How hard is it for you trying to run the Football League when you have the FA saying, well, we've got regulations, why don't you come up with a plan B and have a new set of competition? You've got the Premier League saying, well, we want to have a look at your rules and scrutinize them, and we want to be able to input. And then you've got 72 clubs, all of which have diverse interests.
I mean, it's a big ask trying to find a solution that works for everybody. I mean, our regulations are based around the law, but they're also based around the principle of a members' organisation where 72 like-minded clubs agree to work by a set of rules that help actually protect the competition itself and to try and keep it fair, to give everybody the same opportunity. So the law plays a part, but the laws is actually the foundation stones of coming up with a set of regulations that actually meet the purposes for which clubs need to operate. And Katrina's made the point that you can come into the football business as a lawyer or from any other profession and think, well, it shouldn't be like that. It takes a period of time to understand why we do things in certain ways, all of which have grown over a period of time to allow the actual competition to flourish. As you say, we're unique virtually in England. I mean, we have the governing body in the FA who, and there's 212 of those around the world, ultimately the governing body of football, with a very wide remit of what it is that they actually need to deliver. But of course in England we've got 2 distinct organisations. We've got the Premier League, obviously the top flight of football. Some would say the best league in the world. I'm not going to disagree with that. And then ultimately we've got the Football League, 72 clubs, more people coming through our turnstiles to watch our games than any other league in the world. We are far bigger as a football league than the majority of actually top flight clubs in each division. So the challenges that we face are unique and aren't really replicated anywhere else in the world. So, the law plays a part, but regulation and where they come from for the benefit of clubs is actually got to be the key.
For you, Matt, I mean, looking in on this, again, with a passionate interest in sport, and you look at, and I know you've got a number of good friends who are involved in European football. Are we getting it right by comparison to the way in which you structure your US sports? Or could we learn a bit more from the way you've done things with the NFL, NHL, and so on in the US?
Yeah, I mean, look, you can always learn something from somebody else. I think the US can learn stuff from here as well. I think in regards to this particular topic, I think the hard part for us, for me as an investor, is understanding how all the different parts work together. And it's not always clear whose rules have to be followed. If somebody does not follow financial fair play in, say, the championship and gets promoted, what happens? who is the authority? Is it the Premier League? Is it the FA? Is it the Football League? And that's really the hard part. Is it seems like the one thing I would tell you relative to other places is it seems like there's not a lot of centralized planning. It's not always clear who's in charge.
What do you think about that, Katrin? Something you'd agree with? I mean, from a member club of the Championship, do you feel you have a strong voice, or do you feel, who's affecting you the most? Is it the Football League, Premier League, FA?
I think it's the Premier League, especially your discussions about financial fair play. Most clubs in Championship, they struggle financially. It's very hard, and what we want basically is more money coming down from the Premier League, but it blocks us. And and especially now with the QPR example, it will be very important to see whether they get fined under the Championship financial fair play. They should, but.
Well, it's going to be interesting because we're going to come back to that. 'Cause I think that's going to be quite a hot topic in a few minutes when we look at the position of Queen's Park Rangers. I mean, Daniel, from your perspective, in South America, who are most influential? Is it the clubs, the leagues, the broadcasters, the players, the agents?
Well, I think all of these stakeholders has enormous power depending on the kind of deal you're speaking about. Of course, the television rights are very important for the first division clubs and basically for the second division clubs. But yesterday I was watching another panel, and the information of Deloitte that described the ranking of the 10 most important clubs of the world, and including 2 clubs from Manchester, which bring us to the Soccerex. Is another reality. So, as I said, first and second division, they survive with a good part of this money from the television that doesn't go to any other place, doesn't go to the third division, to small clubs. So, in this perspective, the economic rights are vital nowadays for the survival of the South American football. I'm not saying that we have to find some regulation, we have to give it transparency to this kind of exploitation of economic rights, of TPOs, but basically today we could say that the small clubs, they need to use this kind of tool. And just to give you an example, not just to stay with small clubs, but I'm also a lawyer, as you said, of Fluminense and Internacional. Fluminense and Internacional used very well in the last decade this tool of economic rights. Fluminense became recently Brazilian champion, and Internacional was able to win 2 Libertadores and also for our proud to beat Barcelona in the world title in 2006. And I can assure you that Internacional was able to have a good team to face Barcelona. We know in South America that the Champions League is much more important for you than the world title, but at least it was a good team, exclusively because it could access good players, to hire good players because of economic rights. So in this perspective, I would say that also there's a failure in the system because a great part of economic rights belongs to the agents that just don't inject money really in the clubs as the good economic rights, let's say, which means that an investor comes in and puts money in the club and then is entitled to receive a share in a future transfer or something. This is a good money. This we have to protect. But of course, I think we have to find a way to limit the influence of the agents in the moment that the player signs. Because usually, at least in South America, they are requesting more and more percentages of economic rights.
So the very stated and clear intention of UEFA to prohibit third-party ownership of economic rights is going to be a bad thing for you.
For South America and for some clubs in Portugal, clear, because we saw that Porto was able to form good teams to compete in a high level. Because Porto, I think, is the most notorious case of exploitation of economic rights in Europe, and they are defending this position. It's clear because there was a meeting in FIFA last weekend. The position of UEFA and FIFPro is really strong, aiming to finish with this practice. But I wonder that UEFA released in the end of 2012 a statement saying that if FIFA didn't adopt anything, UEFA would do that. And until now, UEFA didn't do that. And why? Because UEFA knows that if they banish the economic rights exploitation here, clearly in Europe, this investment will go to South America. So this is no good also to UEFA. But it's going to be probably in the ExCo meeting of next year in May, it will be decided by FIFA if they will regulate or simply extinguish.
We'll come back to Matt maybe in a second to talk about investment in players. But Sean, you've heard Catherine as one of your member clubs saying, we actually need a bit more money. We'd like it from the Premier League. That probably isn't going to happen in the near future. From your perspective, why object to third-party ownership if Catherine or Bournemouth or Birmingham or other clubs in the Championship could find an investment fund that's prepared to put up half the money for transfer of players in?
You know, from a very personal perspective, you know, clubs need money. Owners, you know, our owners own clubs. They fund clubs, and at all times they're looking for help and assistance in actually reducing their own personal commitment. That's not to the detriment of the club, that's actually to strengthen it. And obviously, you know, third-party interest, third-party ownership in players is something that comes up regularly. I think the key issue is not actually the third-party ownership element, it is actually the influence. And it's a point that Daniel made, is controlling that influence. If the monies were made available with absolutely no influence over what the future lies of that player, we're in a completely different place to where an agent can dictate to a club that a player is being sold. You know, and that is, certainly in Europe and England, the taboo subject. The only person that should be able to make a decision as to the long-term future of a player that it has registered is that club itself. And I don't think in Europe that anybody's ever been satisfied that that's capable of being achieved. Just coming back to the question about obviously clubs needing and wanting more money. Yes, I mean if I've got one thing that's ringing loud and clear in my ears from the 72 clubs, they want as much central and financial support as possible. To be truthful, the one thing that I've not got any form of uniformity is they're not actually bothered where it comes from. Ultimately, we've got to try and reduce the financial burden on the owners of our 72 clubs. The sooner we can do that, the sooner we have a stronger competition. And I know Matt's going to talk about investment later, and the sooner the clubs are actually more ripe for investment than rather potentially putting additional monies into clubs and actually only to stand still in some cases.
So, I mean, Matt, from your perspective, Sean's saying you've got to get a game right, got to make it as attractive as possible for investors. You've worked on a number of projects on a global basis. What should clubs be doing to make themselves more attractive to someone like you who comes along and says, well, I'd actually like to invest?
I think they're doing everything. I mean, everybody's going to do everything they can. That's one of the reasons why third-party ownership is a discussion. If you give people a set of rules, we're economic beings, and they're going to look for ways to finance and make money, or at least break even, so they don't have to keep writing checks. And so they're going to work within the framework. I think I'll go back to sort of the higher level here, which is trying to figure out whether or not the Football League and the Premier League are partners or are they competitors? And I'll draw the comparison. In the US, we had about 30 years ago, we have a gigantic league called the NFL. And there was another league that decided to compete that was more junior, and they played in the spring, called the USFL. And I don't know if everybody remembers that, but they were somewhat successful. They had about 25,000 people would go to the games, but it took place in the spring. And by and large, it was not clear whether or not it was going to work, but it was somewhat successful. TV ratings were lower. Ultimately, though, the USFL decided they wanted to compete with the NFL, and a guy named Donald Trump forced the league to play in the fall and go head-to-head, and it ended up folding. There's definitely precedence for leagues to compete, and there's precedence in the U.S. We have minor leagues that are owned by our top league. So the NHL has the AHL, basketball has the D League. I mean, so there's precedence. And I think figuring that out would be helpful, because there's some really perverse incentives from an investor's perspective. If I'm Bournemouth or Charlton, right, there's this gigantic payment if I get promoted. And so there's, if you give people bad incentives, they follow them. And that is the part that I think has to get figured out first.
What, Sean?
I need to, again, to Matt's question, I mean, the Football League and the Premier League are both partners and competitors. We're partners in so much as during a 12-month season, the divisions they're actually fixed. We're partners because we have this phenomena of promotion and relegation in sport, which I actually think is the lifeblood of English football. It keeps that dream alive. It brings investors into English football, to try and get promoted to the Premier League. So, on that basis, we're partners because we are linked at many different levels because we are both competition organisers. We're not governing bodies. We're competition organisers, and we do organise those competitions. The world outside would say exceptionally well. We're competitors because in the main, the games predominantly kick off at the same time. Forget the games that change for Sky TV. So ultimately, we're competitors because we're each looking for spectators to come through our turnstiles. The beauty about English football, it is very parochial, and a Bournemouth fan will tend always to be a Bournemouth fan, regardless of performances on the pitch. And that same story goes up and down the country over, through cities and towns, because actually they relate to the community in which they represent. So we're both partners and competitors. And it's actually one of the strengths that the competition organisers do have the ability to acknowledge that at times we're going to be in conflict, but in most occasions we're actually better in harmony.
But Katrin, for you, as Charlton Athletic, wanting to be ambitious, wanting to get promotion, Charlton Bournemouth playoff final would be ideal this season. But looking to the future, you are trying to make ends meet. You're trying to comply with the rules. At the moment, you're allowed to have losses. Those losses are capped. Mm-hmm. But if your owner decided he wanted to breach them, there's the potential for consequences upon your club. And although the accounting periods are still being finalised, there's a rumour that at least half of the clubs in the Championship are not going to meet the existing regulations. No doubt frustrating for you, but do the regulations work for you at the moment?
Well, we had this lengthy debate at the Football League, so a number of clubs basically want to make the losses that are permitted for the moment 8 million, increase it up to 12 million.8, which is, for us, that would be a loss that is equals or is higher than our turnover, which is complete nonsense. Because, we have a different approach. Obviously, as Charlton Athletic, we're in the Championship, we want to be competing. But we are also very realistic that only each year 3 teams go up. So how many years, almost all of the clubs that are in Championship, they have been in Premier League, which I think maybe can open a debate whether Premier League and Championship clubs should be more regulated because they are close. Championship clubs are part of Premier League to a certain extent, I would say. So it's maybe for some things we need to collaborate maybe more closely. About the financial fair play, so if Charlton, although Charlton is very ambitious, I represent an owner that won't let me allow the losses of 12 million.8, and it's also, it doesn't make any sense because if we want to attract investors, we're not looking to sell, but just the whole point is to not create more debt. And I think now with the rules that are there, that you need to inject equity, so to fill up the gap up to 3 million, or at the UEFA, and it's 45 million up to 5 million. That brings us a bit closer to the solution, I would say. Because it allows clubs not to make even more debts. And when we looked at buying Charlton, we were in discussions with a number of clubs, and the owner talked with clubs with so many debts that it's, you only offer £1 and then the owner is insulted because he thinks, well, my club is much more worth than £1. But that's it. So, I'm strongly against making a bigger deviation of losses, because it will go further away from the solution, and it doesn't make any sense. And UEFA and Football League both say that as an objective of the financial fair play is to create good governance for clubs and to make them more financially stable, which I think the ultimate customers of football, we all know, are the fans. And coming in at Charlton, the fans were very upset and at the same time grateful, because when we came in, most of our players didn't have any contract beyond 2014, because the owner wasn't investing, the previous owner wasn't investing anymore. So they were very close to going down, being bankrupt. And as fans, only what they want, obviously, I represent Charlton, not a big club. I mean, they want a stable club where they know that every 2 weeks they can go to the football and enjoy a game.
I mean, for you, Daniel, this whole European concept of financial fair play, and we could probably debate whether the word fair for quite some time, as to whether it is fair or not. Is it something that works for you with the clubs you're involved with in South America? Or do you feel that, I mean, is it something that is basically irrelevant?
Yeah, I think a few years ago, FIFA tried to impose that on a global level, and then in CONMEBOL tried to impose that on the level of the confederations competition. So any and all clubs, like UEFA did, that would take part in Libertadores or Sul-Americana, the Cups of South America, should comply with these conditions that were very similar, because they had to follow the draft that FIFA made, the draft, almost a copy of the UEFA manual. So, but in the end, they realized that we're not prepared for that. Despite this fact, in Brazil, there's a huge effort for some, probably CBF, the Brazilian Confederation, and some part of the government trying to impose rules that are similar to some rules or some conditions that you have in the financial fair play. I think that at least a set of rules that can be applied in a realistic way, not in a not in a ideal world, but in a realistic way, because otherwise you won't have probably no club competing, because no one will be able to achieve that at this moment. So first of all, you have to have a time for the transition. This is the key issue. I think you have to prepare clubs to comply with that. But still, the Brazilian clubs, many of them are struggling with tax and fiscal debts, and this is a huge problem. And then we come back again to the economic rights, exactly because there's no regulation. So it's easier to do, and the clubs serve themselves of this tool.
I mean, Matt, from your perspective as a global investor, weighing up maybe whether you were looking at South America or you're looking at Europe or you're looking at England, do these systems affect you or tend to make you lean towards one area or another if you're looking at investment within sport?
I think, no, you know, we look at where, you know, I'm like anybody else out there, you're going to look where the money is. Right now, you've got a massive media contract for the Premier League, and that's what everybody wants a share of. And that is driving everything. That's the big elephant in the room. That's what Charlton wants, and that's what everybody else wants out there. And everybody who's in the Premier League wants to preserve that. And they want to stay up there. And so that is really the thing that's driving everything. And if you're in the championship level and you want to move up, you're going to do everything within your ability to do that. If you want to spend more, that's great. If you want to raise money by doing deals with, you know, letting people take stakes in players, that sounds great too. Whatever it takes, because that is the thing that is, you know, that's the magnet that everything has the highest amount of gravity. Everybody is circling around that. And so as an investor, that's the thing that's going to drive everything within, you know, English football.
I mean, from your perspective, would you rather a system where, so long as you were able to demonstrate you had the money to cover the losses, you could put in as much as you want? Or are you happy with the concept as an investor of a limited system where you can only have limited losses?
I think more governance at this point in English football is probably better.
What's wrong with it at the moment?
Well, I just think you have you're not really playing the same game. I don't know that if one team has a wage bill of 10 million pounds and another one has one of 50, and you're playing against each other, that does not really seem like competition. That seems like you've got two different agendas. And while fine, I don't know that that's in the best interest of the game. You really want people playing closer games, or people more, it should be closer in terms of relative playing field. That's just intuitively, that seems like that's the right decision. And that holds as well as the Premier League. Like, you've got 6 teams that basically play for, the top spots. When there's a more level playing field, I don't know. Perhaps if Bournemouth got promoted,
It's possible.
Right? And if Bournemouth got, perhaps you would come and tell me that you think they're going to, they're going to win. They're going to win the Premier League, but it's really unlikely.
Yes. 42 years of watching them, and I know Jeff's here, but 42 years of watching them would say that's unlikely.
Yeah. And so it would be a lot better to watch, though, if you knew if they did get promoted that they had a chance of winning. Most fans, that's what people care about, is they want to have a chance to win. And so I'm probably in favor of more governance rather than less.
So Sean, I know you can't talk about specifics, but I could bounce this back to Catherine. Queen's Park Rangers spend quite a bit of money, get promoted. Interesting, because again, and I appreciate you can always bounce it back to Catherine here. Football League have tried hard to get regulations in place. If you get promoted and you breach the regulations, there's a fine system. Now, with an intention originally that monies from that fine would get redistributed to clubs who behaved. Now that money's going to charity because the Premier League requested that. How does that pan out on this dynamic? And I say I do appreciate there's only limitations what you can say.
Yeah, I'll go as far as I can to try and help. Our regulations are clear. There are a set of rules that all clubs in membership of the Football League, and in this particular instance, the Championship, we've got different regimes in League 1 and League 2. But ultimately, there's a set of rules in place that actually limited losses, and these are adjusted losses after adding back any amount of value that the club naturally expends in such areas as community work, developing younger players. So it's not, you can't derive straight from the bottom line of a P&L to what the actual loss will be for the purpose of financial fair play, because the amounts are adjusted. And decision time's nearly upon us. 1st of December is the day by which clubs have to submit to us their financial fair play returns. That's the only stage at which we will know whether there is as many as half of the clubs that was indicated earlier that will actually be in breach of the regulations, because the regulations don't just apply to clubs that are promoted, they actually apply to clubs that remain in membership as well. And ultimately those clubs could see themselves under embargo from the registrations embargo from the 1st of January for until the end of the season. So there are penalties even for those clubs that don't get promoted. Understandably, the focus predominantly in the media has been upon the promoted clubs and what the requisite fines will be. But we're a little bit too early a stage to say how many clubs there will be. Without betraying any confidences, I don't believe it will be the half of the clubs that we talked about, that was somebody mentioned earlier. I think it'll be significantly less than that as a result of the principles that can be adopted in actually calculating your financial fair play result. But the fundamental issue of how it starts is it's all based upon clubs' audited accounts. So it's clubs and their auditors that are ultimately looking at all the options. So we are going to rely on clubs' auditors to start with in a very significant way. So that's financial fair play. Yes, the current the regulation, the solidarity agreement between the Football League and the Premier League. It was the intention that those clubs that didn't breach the regulations would share the fines ultimately between them. That as a principle didn't find favour with the Premier League, which was disappointing because ultimately that's what the 24 member clubs indicated they wanted. Now the 24 member clubs ultimately decided in accepting the solidarity agreement that they would agree. I can't say voluntarily, but they agreed that the money would be distributed to charities. Now, what those charities are, it is to be determined. I would hope that if fines are successfully collected, those charities will be football-based and even potentially based around football clubs in the Championship. But it's not going to be able to drive and go to the bottom line of actual clubs and cover wage bills going forward. So I think there's still scope for football to benefit, but we have to get through the whole process first, and that starts on the 1st of December. So. Fortunately, until that time, there's nothing specific to talk about. Just before we move on, we talked about debt earlier, and obviously, what is the principle of financial fair play? What is it supposed to achieve? We need to look at debt very carefully, in my view, because there's different types of debt. If debt is owner debt, and those owners have been supporting their football clubs for many, many seasons, it's going to grow year on year to be quite a significant number. But those owners are still there. Short of getting promoted to the Premier League or actually selling the club, the chances of them actually getting any of their debt repaid is very, very small. So not all debt is bad. We'd be better off without it. But if it is to the owners of the club, it's not actually affecting the way that club operates, because there's no strict repayment terms. So the clubs are under pressure if it is to the owner, which is something that's actually worth taking into account. Now, finally, financial fair play, finding a model that works. This has got to have been one of the most discussed issues amongst the media, football clubs, national associations, governing bodies, internationally, agents. Everybody's had a look at what is the right form of mechanism. And whether whether word fair should be in there or not is yet another.
It's not in the Premier League, is it?
Pardon?
It's sustainability and profitability.
And I think that's what we're about. It's about sustainability and what ultimately can be, and what can be sustained. But the point I want to make is that the Championship, all the focus is on the Championship. You heard me say earlier that football in England, in my view, is relatively unique, driven by the size of the football league. We have the Championship. We have a very successful FFP regime in League One and League Two, which is salary cost management protocol. I know there's going to be lots of acronyms, but ultimately it's limiting wages to a percentage of your turnover, accepting there's any adjustments. And that works perfectly well in League One and League Two to actually mirror the ambitions of owners in those divisions. I can even go as far as, when you use the word sustainability, understand why an FFP regime can work in the Premier League at its different levels, because ultimately the bar is that high that the majority of people will fall naturally under it in any circumstances when you look at their actual wage expenditure and what they can afford to pay. Then we come to the Championship, where we've got owners with all got the same objective, to get promoted. What's not common is what set of regulations should sit alongside it to allow that to happen while keeping the club sustainable. We've owners that want to limit the amount of losses in one group. We've got another group that arguably would want no regulation whatsoever and to be able to spend whatever it is that they want to spend because it's their asset, their club, and that's what they own. And then there's a group in the middle that probably sits somewhere between the two and decide where they're going to sit in the debate when they look at the results towards the end of November. Because if you're challenging for promotion, you want the opportunity to be able to invest in January. If you're too near the bottom, you want to be able to invest in January to avoid relegation. If you're sat in the middle, you're probably happy for no bit to gain an advantage over you. So actually trying to find a mechanism that works to cover all the different ownership models, structures and ambitions that are in place in the Championship is a very, very difficult job. And as Katrina's mentioned, we had two or three goes last season with the Championship to see if we could change the regulations to actually give everybody an opportunity. That failed, ultimately. The reasons it failed was there wasn't a consensus. There wasn't enough clubs in any one position because of the different size, diversion of clubs. What we've got to remember is that a club without a parachute payment last season in the Football League, through a combination of solidarity payments and basic award, received just over £4 million. The clubs that were relegated from the Premier League in the first year of their parachute, received 26.2 million, comparing like and like. Clubs in years 3 and 4 of parachute payments actually received 11.6 million. And just for the sake of anybody who's actually taking notes, those are second years received 21.4 million. So fair's not the word in all this. Is how do we actually give everybody the opportunity of getting promoted when you're looking at potentially 12 clubs sharing so much money, and the balance receiving 4 million. Now the 4 million is exceptionally useful, so let's not decry the 4 million. It's actually the parachute payments that does it bring an unnatural balance to the competition.
What do you think about that, Matt?
Yeah, no, you're trying to solve a tough problem. The thing, I always wonder about this, which is I don't know how much discussion has been had about why 3 teams move up and 3 teams move down. I don't know if that's a magic number. It's just always how it's been. Or instead of agents taking stakes in players and teams doing debt, what about selling medallions? What if you said, look, look, if you really want to be in the Premier League, XYZ owner, okay, Bournemouth, okay, we're going to sell a medallion. 2 teams move up, have some sort of playoff, and then 1 team, if just have a medallion at the end of the year that you can auction off, and the benefits go to the members.
I mean, the principle of football for many years has lived on promotion and relegation, and selling a promotion place or reducing a promotion place is actually going to restrict the ability of the majority. It's going to restrict the chances of a club getting promoted from the Championship. So I think 3 promotion places up and down is the right thing to do. I also think the Premier League are actually pretty set on 3 places as well, because it brings 3 new clubs into their competition each season, which keeps that product fresh as well.
But so the Premier League solidarity payments, 40-50 million pounds?
Well, I think overall the Premier League the solidarity payments to Football League clubs, because they also go to League 1 and League 2 as well. Yeah. Will come to just over £50 million per annum. £50 million. So from your perspective, Matt, as an investor, there's probably no legal basis for this, but if you were the Football League and you were thinking of selling a place to the Premier League, what price would you put on it?
A lot more than £50 million. I mean, obviously, and I mentioned this to Sean, I mean, if I could find 23 other people to go out and buy championship clubs right now, and we could figure out and know that we've got 3 spots in the Premier League, we absolutely, we would do it. And I know there's a subsequent, panel on match fixing, but obviously the economics are somewhat crazy. And
so you'd buy the championship in an ideal world. Get 23 friends, buy all the clubs up.
Yeah, for sure. The prices, because the Premier League is growing, and you've got a massive media payment that you're going to, you've got effectively you've got a license to 3 spots, 3 golden tickets every year as a football league. And that's how I would look at it from an investor, is that the championship is, you've got people who are trying to play, and some of their goals are to win the championship, and some of the owners' goals are to get promoted. And they're 2 very different things. One is I want to beat the other team on the field. I want to beat all my competitors. The other one is I want to get a share of that media payment. But that media payment is such a big number these days. It used to be smaller, and I think the field has, is pretty far apart now. I mean, if you think about a team that has, it used to be that your game day, your match day revenues were a big portion of your turnover. And if you think about some of the teams that got promoted this year, I'll pick one that we know, Burnley. I mean, the match day is going to be tiny. It's really just about that darn media payment, or the parachute payment, and that's, those are big numbers. They're a lot bigger than they used to be.
And again, just to give that some context for the benefit of everybody, I mean, last year's winners, the team that actually earned more from the Premier League last season actually received £97 million in total, and the team that finished 4th bottom was £65 million. So the 3 clubs that relegated last year earned somewhere between 60 and 65 million. So I do that just to give some context to how that sits with 26 million as a year one parachute, coming down to the 4 million for a club that's outside the parachute payment regime. It demonstrates why everybody wants to get promoted, but it also demonstrates the issues you have upon relegation coming into any form of financial regulatory regime to try and find one that works for everybody. Ultimately, the competition on the pitch on a Saturday, on the proverbial Saturday afternoon, is the most important thing, and everybody turns up wanting their team to win, and believing that they have a fair opportunity of winning. Common ownership, and this isn't the common ownership in Charlton's model, because there's obviously only one team playing in this competition. Just to make this absolute, just to put some context.
So Charlton you've got 5 clubs that you're owner.
4.
Four clubs currently.
Sorry, 4 clubs, but only one playing in this particular division. Obviously, under Matt's hypothetical situation, ultimately you could have a group of owners or investors that have got interests in any number of any sides in the same division. I mean, that does start taking us into real dark waters in relation to dual ownership control. I'm not going to use match fixing in the emotive word, determining what the result is before you start. But we've all faced this issue, and the UEFA competitions see it periodically in the Champions League and UEFA competitions, where clubs in common ownership, there are issues of them playing each other. I actually believe the product on the pitch has to be seen as being genuine. They have to be operating completely independently to actually give some real value to. I'm going to use the word integrity. The real value of the integrity of the competition. If fans don't believe that what they are going to see is genuine, and the result is, the result could go either way on any given day, then I actually think the real love of football and the beauty of English football, through the strength of our 92 professional clubs, and in particular 72 in the Football League, will disappear.
No, but it's obviously a worldwide problem. I mean, Daniel, from your perspective, you've dealt with a number of cases relating to alleged match fixing and the impact on clubs. But for you, this model of multiple club ownership that Charlton, I mean, Katrin, your clubs are all in Europe.
Yes.
So for you, are you seeing this from a South America perspective? If Matt's 23 friends plus one come along and we're looking at, well, actually, if we don't just buy the championship, we buy a couple of clubs in South America, clubs in Europe, and so on. Is that something that you think is going to become commonplace?
It's not in Brazil, at least. It's not very common. What we see is in Chile, there's a structure. I think it's more similar to the structures of the clubs that are companies in Europe and US, because in Brazil, clubs are civil associations. So this is a totally different structure. Now we have some clubs that they were created clearly just to create and to form players to sell these players later. So this model, but even these clubs, we don't see big groups like controlling a pair or 3 or 4 clubs. It's just a company with many times with 4 investors putting the money, create one club, which is a company, and using that, but not controlling more than one club. In the past, Parmalat from Italy kind of controlled Palmeiras and Juventude and raised some issues when they were confronting themselves in the same competition. And then our law prevented this control of 2 clubs by a same owner. That's basically the picture there. But it's a kind of impacting to check the numbers of the television rights, for instance, here that we were speaking, and you mentioned that, because if you realize that, and I was speaking to the lawyer of Sporting from Portugal in Lausanne last week, and he was saying that he was surprised about the amounts of the prizes that are paid for the champions of the Libertadores, which is our more important competition, comparing to any and all payments and amounts that we are dealing in this table now. Just a kind of a notion is the Libertadores television rights have been sold as far as we know, because even this information is not totally disclosed, which is, for you, it must be a scandal. I would be in in the level of sophistication that you have of the rules and the enforcement of the rules. Better than the rules is to enforce them, because we have many rules in South America, in Brazil, but we have a problem enforcing or not enforcing them. So basically, as far as we know, the television rights of the Libertadores were sold by Conmebol to a company, a company in Argentina for only $40 million, which is nothing. And this company, this broker, sold this for, let's say, 20 times this amount. And this 20 times doesn't come back to no club receives a share of this profit. So this is, I think, is a very important issue for you to realize the perspective we have, that we have to walk and to build a better structures and more reliable administration of this money, because this money belongs to the clubs, and in the end, they belong somehow to the players. And it's interesting to see that in a recent litigation that is occurring in Uruguay now, there was the Players Union of Uruguay. They were looking at this issue too, because they think that if they don't participate directly, and we know that the structure doesn't allow the players to go directly, I'm not discussing that, I'm not getting into the merits of that, but if not even the clubs receive this money, so the players are even far. And there was a change in the statutes of Conmebol to say that originally these rights of the television rights belongs to Conmebol. In the past, it was not like that. It was written there in the statutes that the rights belongs to the clubs, and the clubs immediately or automatically, when they take part in a competition, they are assigning to Conmebol the right to explore and to share these rights. There's a huge difference in terms of concept and property in one and another concept. So I think that we have to develop, to work a lot, because we are so far from this reality that we're discussing here that it's a bit frustrating to see that we have to go again, and I'm sorry to repeat that, to the old school of economic rights, because we explore economic rights in Argentina and Brazil since the end of 80s. And you've begun to discuss that with Teve Mascherano case just because of the third-party influence, not because of the possible benefits. We just discussed here, and we started with Mascherano case, and then we had the Article 18Bs of FIFA, because we are dealing with the collateral damages of a bad exploitation of economic rights. So we have to take care of that, at least for us in South America, because we are very far from your good perspective.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, certainly from people we're working with. This summer has been the busiest in terms of untangling those rights for transfers into England. Sean, sorry, you were going to...
No, it's just an interesting concept. I mean, obviously, Europe has stood against third-party ownership for forever, ultimately. And, you know, we discussed earlier, we could understand the economic merits of it, and we all had concerns over influence. It's just an interesting question for Daniel really. And obviously, do you perceive a situation where economic rights in South America are limited to economic rights in just one player, or will it be an investment in a squad of players? Because I think from a concept perspective, there are different merits in relation to an investment that's secured against future transfer receipts, which is completely within the control of the club, and the actual individual rights in just one individual. And I'm just interested, is the model in South America just purely investment in one player, or is there a group of investors that have an investment in a squad of players and just sharing transfer receipts, very much like a bank in this country could ultimately lend money against future transfer values, if indeed you could find a bank to do that nowadays?
No, definitely is. I'll give you an example. We have a club called Juventude that won the Brazilian Cup 8 years ago. Is the third most important club of my state. We have in my state, we have Internacional and we have Grêmio. We kind of, don't take me wrong, export a lot of good players. We sold Oscar to Chelsea, Sandro to Tottenham in the past. Grêmio sold many players also sold to England. And but the thing is, you have to these investors. usually take much more than one, I would say, many players, because otherwise it's not interesting. But the key issue here is that if we, and I'm saying that openly, that this is a statement that we need this kind of money, because there's no money for television for a division club, for instance, in Brazil. So let's imagine that a good transfer, a small club doesn't have a chance to do a good transfer for a good money. A small club in Brazil has to transfer a player to a bigger club in Brazil, then he goes to Portugal usually, unless he's a huge player like Neymar or Oscar, they can come directly, but usually the path is Brazilian players go to Portugal or to Spain first, and then they come to Premier League or to Germany, usually big players, I mean. So if you're speaking about a third division club or a small club, you have to have the opportunity of getting some money, of transforming in assets any and all players that you have. So this is this is a perspective that usually people doesn't realize, who is not really working with economic rights in this large scale as we do there. The thing is, a small club doesn't transfer a player for a good amount of money. So they take advantage that the only asset that they have is a lot of potential good players for the future. So they are able to extract some money from any and all players. So the structures there of financing football or South American football by means of using economic rights definitely is not just for one player.
So that's a finance. So that's a finance path rather than a career path.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. As I said, only last week, we had a client who wants to set up a substantial fund to invest in third-party rights. But for you, Katrin, for you, Matt, probably we draw this to a close so we can have a few questions to the floor. But for both of you, transfer system, is it something we should have or not? Should we be able to trade players for money, in both your views?
Well, and when I look at Charlton, the only way to make or lose money is basically by trading players or keeping the wage bill down. So for us, it's important that we can sell players, basically.
Matt, what do you think? You don't have it in the NFL, do you, or NHL? Or?
It's different. There's still centralized management there, and I think as long as the governing bodies are empowered, because ultimately what everybody wants, is what Sean says, is to have the best possible match, on the weekends, and to have the teams be competitive. And ultimately, from the league's perspective, you want to develop the best players. And these clubs, I think you guys spend quite a bit of money developing your players. And if you can't keep that player, you have to be able to monetize that value, because you've spent so much trying to develop them. And so it does make sense.
I mean, transfer fees are ultimately the lifeblood of the majority of football league clubs, and it's interesting hearing the Brazilian model where a smaller club sells to a bigger club in Brazil, who can then maximise the return from selling into Europe, and obviously there's an interest probably through some form of sell-on arrangement as we know it here, and that's very clear. And I think from the football league clubs are invested significant millions every year, around 60 million, in developing young players. And protecting transfer values in those players is absolutely key for the long-term stability of those clubs. I tell a story about Fabian Delph, who made his debut for England last night, who started at Bradford, went to Leeds. So that's in terms of stature of clubs at that particular time, that would virtually mirror the arrangement. And of course, then Leeds were able to sell him to the Premier League and maximise the transfer value. And you're right, Bradford would never have got the same transfer fee for the player had they sold him directly into the Premier League. Equally, Fabian, whilst he had opportunities to leave Leeds earlier, decided that actually cutting his teeth and playing at Leeds was going to be in his best interest, and also the football club's best interest, who'd invested a lot of money in playing him. So ultimately went for a far higher fee than players of a similar age would do now, without having actual experience on the back. So keeping players involved and playing at the clubs that train them is a significant thing that we need to address.
Thanks. I'm sure actually, I'm conscious the time is almost out. We promised we'd have some questions. We can't see people very easily. Presumably the lights can come up a bit.
Yeah.
We do have a few minutes for questions. I presume there should be roving microphones somewhere. So if anybody has got a question, until David tells me, or Larry tells me it's time we've got to get off the stage, we'll happily take them. So please do put your hand up and we'll try and see. The gentleman down here in the third row at the front. If you could just say who you are and name and background, that'd be great.
And which newspaper you work for?
Not the newspapers. Jonathan Booker, Chiron Sports. I'd just like to ask what the panel's opinion on FIFA's plans to abandon the current licensing system for agents in April 2015. How they think it will impact on the overall game.
Katrin, do you want to start with that?
Well, I'm curious to see whether it will be properly implemented. I think you had some questions about it.
Yeah, honestly, at last Saturday morning, I was in the CAS seminar in Lausanne, and there was a panel composed by Omar Ongaro from the head of the Player Status Committee of FIFA, and there was some lawyers and some other important people to discuss the team, and even in the panel, they couldn't agree how it will work. What I know for sure is that there will be a very difficult period of adaptation, I think. The good thing is that the cap of 3% that was imagined by FIFA, it seems that will not be adopted. So it's just an indication that should be respected, a cap of 3%, which is not realistic number, at least in South America. I don't know any agent that works for 3% in a transfer, honestly. But the thing is, at the moment that FIFA assigned to the federations to make the control of every and each transfer and not of every and each agent, we are going to have a huge trouble. Because you can imagine the last transfer window day in China or any other country. I mean, I'm getting a country far from Brazil, even farther than England, 12-hour flight. So you're flying with your client, with your player, if you're an agent, and you have to sign there. And then you just face that in that specific federation that is in a specific country, they have a national law that is applicable to this kind of deal. Like, for instance, they require that you have to have a company registered in the country. So I don't know how you're going to act. Probably someone will indicate for you a law firm that is related to the federation, I don't know. So these practical issues will be really difficult because FIFA said that the federations can simply use the minimum standard that FIFA have in the draft, and it's really minimal, or can scrutinize a little bit better if the transfer can be registered. So I don't know. The only thing is that the player is not obliged to be represented by an agent or by a lawyer. But the problem is that sometimes the agent has to follow, sporting rules by FIFA, otherwise he cannot be paid. But the first impact in terms of trying to get the money before FIFA judicial bodies, that I think was one of the aims of FIFA, not dealing anymore within these, its own judicial bodies with this kind of issues. So I think that CAS will now receive a lot of claims. Ordinary arbitration, not in appeals, like it happens today if you have to pass by FIFA. So I think it's going to be a very difficult adaptation in the first moments. But then in the end, it's going to be a little bit more free than it is today.
Sean, Matt, you got anything to add to that?
I think we'll be going back to the days of the Wild West. The absence of regulation. It can't be good for clubs in terms of how they actually have to deal with matters that come in front of them. So we talked about implementation of regulations earlier, and the problems that people have had, and ultimately we're in this position because FIFA haven't been able to implement the regulations that they conceived as being the right thing to do. So effectively, it is akin to a certain extent of sticking your hands up in the air saying, we haven't managed to solve it, good luck, lads.
Any other questions? We've got one up there at the back. Can you just wait for the microphone to come to you?
Two-part question, please. I think I should have addressed this question to Mr. Blatter, but he's not here right now.
We have an eminent replacement.
Right. So to Daniel, if I may call you by your first name, and Sean. Okay, regarding the transfer, and I should use the word youth players, not minor players, because a youth player can be a player up to the age of 21, I believe, according to FIFA statute. Now, with the transfer of a youth player, FIFA stipulates that a youth player must have residency within Europe of 5 years, I believe. Now, if a player has dual nationality, United States and Colombian nationality, for instance, and I'm going to give you a classical example. There is a bilateral agreement between Spain and Colombia that any Colombian player born to a Colombian citizen becomes automatically a Spanish citizen. Now, that Colombian citizen player with residency in Spain for 2 years is awarded automatically a Spanish passport. So that would contravene with the FIFA statute of the 5-year minimum residency in Europe. How would FIFA address this issue? And maybe Mr. Daniel Gravel has the answer for me, please.
A brief answer, hopefully, so we get a couple more questions before we have to come off stage.
I know it's a complex question, perhaps, I don't know, but...
You may need a private meeting afterwards with Daniel.
No, I just can tell you. Can I circumvent your question a little bit? Well, I don't remember the name of the case, but there was a recent case of the CAS decision that I think it opens the door to the transfers of South American young players with double nationality before they become 18 years old, which is a very important decision, and probably we're going to see many other clubs trying to transfer players under 18, and it's easy to find in south of Brazil and Uruguay, Argentina, players with Italian and German passport, for instance, and Spanish too. So that might be a door that it is a commercial opportunity for many agents, and I'm not saying that it's good, because we know why the rules were created to protect minors. We know that there was a lot of damaging action in this field, but if we move to the seat of a club and you want to buy or to get young players in South America, good players that are, of course, they are cheaper because they are young, they have not been tested, but if someone wants to invest, I think should try to analyze this perspective, which is quite new. I think there's no... I think this decision was issued less than 6 months ago.
There's time probably just for 2 last questions. Any further questions? Yeah. Anybody has one at the back there?
Hi, this is just a question for Catherine. Julian Springer from Clark Wilmot. I was keen just to hear a club's perspective on any potential fines now been given to charity rather than distributed to the clubs as previously agreed.
That's painful.
Would you rather have the money?
Well, I think if we're all looking in Championship to get more money into the league, and if this would be a way, it's rather painful, because it could have been ended up as £2 million per club, more or less, which is very substantial for a club like Charlton, and especially if you are complying and people are breaching the rules, and it's an easy way to get more money into without upsetting too many other people, without asking directly the Premier League more money. Because of the fine, we could have had that money. So it's disappointing, but hey.
Do you not, as a very accepting view, do you not feel that it would be appropriate for someone somehow to have told the Premier League no? In actual fact, we want that money coming to us. Why should you give it to charity? It's not your money. In actual fact, it was a contract between us and the relevant club.
Yes.
One last question. Is there one last question here? Down here at the front.
Sean, it's Mike Farnan. With the recent influx of foreign ownership, has the Football League re-looked at the fit and proper process, as we've had a couple of controversial sales in recent weeks and months?
Yeah, I mean, the owners and directors test principles remain always under review, and obviously each application that comes forward tends to test and push the boundaries a little bit further. But I think the extension that the focus is now to a certain extent. The owners and directors test is ultimately just self-certification against a preset of rules with regard to eligibility. I think the key issue that we're looking at now in more detail is actually source and sufficiency of funding. And, how do you actually ensure that somebody coming into a club as an owner of a club has the sufficient funds to be able to deliver against the business plan that's been put forward as part of the process? And the owner of Charlton, Mr. Dushley, when he took over, went through this process to ensure that he actually had the financial ability to carry out and deliver against the commitments that he made, and came out with some very favourable comments. Whilst it wasn't a particularly pleasant experience being interrogated by members of the Football League's executive, to say, have you got the money to be able to do this? I mean, it's the sort of question you ask then gasp.
And we were placed under a transfer embargo because we missed the meeting with the Football League.
Yeah, so
and during January, because we didn't have the interview with the owner.
So as Katrina said, these aren't things that we just pay lip service to. The Charlton takeover went through, couldn't satisfy us about source and sufficiency of funding, so we have immediately put them under transfer embargo to protect the position until such stage as we've satisfied. So we are going far further now than we have done historically, because we need to do. It's not just the people whose names on the ticket. We need to know as far as we can behind us, who's behind those people, where the money's coming from. And when it's one of the biggest protections we've got against money laundering and any other accusations that are levelled at people who own football clubs. So we continually look for good owners. There's no DNA that says a particular person is a good owner. The only way you can judge an owner, whether they are good or bad, is how they perform. All we can do as the Football League is to try to make sure that we've got as many of the bases covered before they're actually given the opportunity to test it.
I'm just going to leave then the last comment to Matt. There's Sean saying we're encouraging good owners to come into football. You've looked at a wide range of potential investments in sport. Ownership of the game here, are we getting it right? How's it going to become more attractive to you to get involved in European football?
Well, first, I think I want to make sure everybody knows, I wouldn't be a worry to the group because I don't have 23 friends. So
that's a relief.
No, look, we're going to do, I think our preference is to buy a Premier League club. And the worry when you buy a Premier League club is you don't want to get relegated. But I think we'll be in the Premier League club because that's, as a foreign owner, that tends to be the thing that it's on TV. That's what my kids want to watch. That's the stuff that, I've got a child in college and, all his friends are wearing the Premier League club gear. I think and what's going to draw us is the money. The media payments, the TV contract is going to be substantial at the next level, although it's substantial today, and that's, from a financial perspective, that is the place to invest, is in the Premier League. We think very highly of the championship. The ability to predict which team is going to move up is hard. Even QPR, right? I mean, I'm friends. My very good friend owns the club that lost to them, and they had 11 and QPR had 10, and it came down, and it's an American club, American owners, and they were just stunned. It can happen.
We could talk for hours. I'd like to say thanks, Sean, Daniel, Catherine, Matt, for what has been a fascinating panel. We're all here during the day, so we'll be delighted to speak further. One thing I'm going to mention just in closing, at 2 o'clock for clubs, and it is only clubs only, there is a special session in the Don Revie Lounge where Chris Anderson, author of The Numbers Game, will be actually probably taking the discussion further and explaining why everything you knew about football is probably wrong. It's going to be a fascinating insight into the Moneyball concept, the numbers game, the way in which clubs are organised, how you choose your left back, right back, manager, and so on, with James Earl, who's our head of sport investment and finance. So that's in the Don Revie Lounge, 2 o'clock for an hour. Otherwise, thank you all for coming. Much appreciated. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.